views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Throughout the school year, Bronx students, teachers, and parents have faced hardships with remote and blended learning. In order to provide solutions and address tech disparities and issues with remote learning here in the Bronx, this morning, Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr., in conjunction with the Bronx Community Foundation, Bronx Impact, South Bronx Rising Together, and DreamYard, are holding a Tech Equity Day of Action at 1 Fordham Plaza. They're joined by public school parents and elected officials discussing the urgent need to get students adequate devices for blended and remote learning. BronxNet is live at 1 Fordham Plaza.
I know the day is dreary and gray. I think it's symbolic of the way that the city is being run. Good morning, I'm Ruben Diaz Jr., the Bronx Borough President. I'm here with my colleagues in government, with parents, with educational advocates, with students. We've been joined by Assemblywoman Nathalia Fernandez. We've been joined by Assemblywoman Carmen Arroyo. We've been joined by the Democratic nominee for the State Assembly, Kenneth Burgos. We've been joined by District Leader Marjorie Velasquez. We've been joined by Matthew Cruz, District Manager of Community Board 10. We've been joined by Tom Sheppard, the CEC President, my appointee. And we've been joined by Geneal, Chacon, who you're going to hear from in a couple of minutes here. She's our Bronx PEP board member. The reason why we're here today is because during this pandemic, during COVID, the Bronx has been totally devastated. We've seen a lot of death, we've seen a lot of sickness, we've seen a lot of our gains in terms of jobs being decimated. Our unemployment is high, and through it all, we all said that we needed to do better. Through it all, the city, the state, the federal government, all of the elected officials, everyone said that we had to start addressing the many issues that the Bronx was suffering from in order to ensure that once we get on the other side of the pandemic, whenever that will be, that we could be able to survive. We saw a lot of marches. We saw a lot of protests around police misconduct and police brutality and Black Lives Matter. And we said that we had to do better to provide a better future for our city, for our state, and for our country. That future lies in our children. And the reason why we're here today, ladies and gentlemen, is because safety of our community and safety of our children and the education of our children are not mutually exclusive. We want and we deserve both. We deserve the safety of our children, but we also demand that we get quality education for our kids. And if Black Lives Matter, then we have to make sure that the city, that the mayor, that the Department of Education, whose building in the Bronx we stand in front of, live up to that promise. I say this because this is not a new fight. I say this because I, along with my colleagues in government, have for so long asked for these changes for so many years. In 2018, I issued a report, my office, with our Director of Education, Monica Major, and our team, Elisa Crespo and others. The report was entitled Programming New York City Students for Success. It was a view of computer science education in New York City. And among other things, we called for addressing the resource gap and making it a priority and a matter of public policy. We called for an adequate funding of vital services to foster excellence in the area and is key to achieving the parity across New York City schools. Any phasing of computer science curricula should be first aimed at creating avenues in success in areas where funding has historically been lacking. We've been trying to do our part here in the Bronx. In the last 11 years, of all the capital funding out of our office that we've allocated, we've been able to allocate over $43 million in technical services and technical equipment alone to our public schools. $43 million. During this pandemic, as students remain in remote learning and as families are participating in blended learning, we see more and more that the school system, that the DOE, and that this city has earned a failing grade in how they've been able to give our children, our families, computers, laptops, and tech assistance. We've asked our parents, we've asked our families to give us a call to our office, to email us, to let us know whether or not they have the devices that are needed in order for their kids, for our children to get the quality services and education that they deserve. Now let me be clear. Let me state some clarity here. My office, we are not the ones, and we should not be the ones providing these devices. We funded this in the past, and we've been making this an issue for over 10 years. It was only until last year that the City Comptroller's Office decided that Chromebooks were part of the eligibility of our capital funds. But we should have been addressing this over a decade ago. And so we've called our parents, we told our parents to call us to see who needs these devices. We have a report now that says that, that shows that over 500 parents or families have called our offices. Our concern is that the DOE, while we have over 200,000 students here in the Bronx alone, they've only issued about 84,000 devices. That's less than 50%. That is unacceptable. Of the 500 families, Bronx families that we've heard from, 49% of those families have students between the grades 1 and 5. These are our babies who do not have the adequate devices. 49% of the 500 families who have contacted us, grades 1 through 5. Imagine your child. Imagine your kid in the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth grade not having the devices that are needed. Students we hear from families where students are using their cell phones or their parents' phones to do their schoolwork. That's horrible. 24% of the students that have contacted us are high school students that are using their own cell phone devices to do their schoolwork. Not a laptop, not some kind of Chromebook, their own cell phones. We hear more and more of our parents saying that they don't have the Wi-Fi services or weak signals. And so what we're calling on is for the DOE to do their job. What we're calling on is for the mayor to live up to his promise. What we're saying is, Mr. Mayor, painting Black Lives Matter on our streets is not good enough. If Black and Latino lives matter, then show us on the educational end. We know that the city has the resources. We're calling that you provide all of our students with the devices that they deserve. More than 1 out of 10 of our New York City school students lack the permanent housing, and last year 30% of those students resided in shelters. Those shelters aren't equipped with devices, and those shelters are not equipped with Wi-Fi services. In mid-March, our Chancellor, Richard Carranza, said the DOE's goal was that, quote, within 1 week, all students will have a device. That was in March. Those weren't my words. Those are the Chancellor's words. He said that in March. Here we are in October. And thousands of our students still don't have devices. We want the DOE to ensure transparency. The ability for families to be able to plan is crucial during this unprecedented times. We don't have a system. We haven't seen a plan. We don't know. We don't have a tracking system. When I order or when my wife orders something on with UPS or with Amazon, we have a tracking device as to where that device is en route, when it's getting to us. We're able to plan. And you mean to tell me with the billions and billions of dollars that are allocated to the DOE, we don't have that technology to be able to track those devices? And we want our families also to be provided with internet access. This city should have long ago had a Wi-Fi bubble. We are so behind the curve. It is a shame. It is irreprehensible. It is unfathomable. It is unacceptable. And we want for the DOE, we want for the mayor of the city of New York to step it up, to do their jobs, because our babies' lives matter. And lastly, before I bring in some of my colleagues to say a few words, whenever our parents call, you know what they say? Just go to a library. But libraries are closed because of the pandemic. Libraries are closed. And then to add insult to injury, we're even hearing reports in the papers today where parents are being threatened, where parents have had their anxieties elevated by saying that because their child is not registering online, they're gonna have ACS come and knock on their doors and remove their kids from their house. That is blaming the victim. That is blaming parents for your own ineptitude, for your own inability to be able to plan, for your own inability to be able to supply these parents and these children with the resources and the devices that they need. And so that's what we're doing here today. I want to thank my colleagues. We have a couple of speakers. I want my colleagues in government to come and say a couple of words to show their support for the parents, for our children. And so with that, let me start with Assemblywoman Nathalia Fernandez.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for standing with us today. The fact that students still don't have access to getting their work done, participating in class is inexcusable. We've known since the end of school session last year, or this year, it's been so long, that they'll need these supplies. We knew when we started remote learning and blended learning that they would need this help. And to this day, the fact that thousands of students are still disconnected from their learning, from their classrooms, from their teachers, that parents still don't have guidance on how to connect their students, how to even teach and run the curriculum, it's inexcusable. The city has failed our children right now in not providing the needed resources at a timely manner, that now our students are behind in their learning. The mayor needs to step up, the Department of Education needs to step up, and we need to get devices and Wi-Fi access in our communities now. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Assemblywoman Carmen Arroyo.
Thank you, Junior, and thank you very much for your initiative of having this press conference today. I represent the 84 Assembly District, and District School 7 is completely in my district. I have been in conversations with the superintendent of the schools because he knows me very well and he knows how I work with the students. But the responsibility, Mr. Borough President, is in the shoulders of the mayor of the city of New York. We have to learn how the system works. The state allow the city to have billions of dollars for education. He is the one responsible to divide that money and to put the money in the hands of the educators. We assign money to the district that never, ever get to the classroom, to the teachers, and to help those parents that doesn't have the facilities to have the devices that they need. for the children to learn. And I always speak with the superintendents because my experience in education is that in the head of that, in that person, that is the one that needs help from us. Because he cannot go to the mayor and tell the mayor what you are doing with the money. And let me tell you something, I was concerned because in my district, 68% of the students in District 7 need bilingual education. And then, when you call the mayor said, oh, but we don't have bilingual teachers. He is taking the money and giving the money in big contracts to his friends. It's good for you to know, because as politicians, we should know the taxpayers' money that the people put every year is used for whatever the administrator wants. This is part of the problem, and I think that we need the whole day to discuss the problems that we have. Mr. Diaz, thank you for your initiative. We have to work together, and we have to be tough, because we represent the people, and I represent the taxpayers, and I'm behind them and the children. Education is my first priority in Albany, because I was a community school board member for 23 years before I was elected. And I know the system, and I know how the people can steal the money that is allocated from taxpayers for the children and the needs of the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Next is Council Member Rafael Salamanca, Chair of the Land Use Committee.
Good morning, buenos dias. Thank you, Mr. Borough President, for convening this press conference. My name is Rafael Salamanca Jr. I represent the South Bronx. Born and raised in the South Bronx, it's been a great honor to be able to be at City Hall and come back and allocate funding to my alma mater, my elementary school, CS 150. I went to visit CS 150 last week to see how social distancing was happening. I also went to visit CS 150 to see how the capital dollars that I allocated was being used. I was proud to see that there were proper social distancing procedures put in place. But when I sat down with the principal, when I asked the principal, how can I be helpful? What are your needs? She said, well, Salamanca, I have 300 students that are doing full-time remote learning. Of those 300 students, 125 of them do not have technology. Unacceptable. The Department of Education has a $32 billion budget. A $32 billion budget. Yes, we understand that when COVID hit and the city was put on pause, there were hiccups. But the city had from March of 2020, and here we are at the end of October, and they still have not gotten their act together. Last week, I went to visit another school in my district, PS 75. Had another 300 students that are doing either blending or full-time remote learning. Of those 300 students, 120 of those students had technology, but did not have access to broadband, did not have Wi-Fi at home. Another failure from our city. What's key here in these two schools is the amount of transitional housing, students that are in the homeless shelter. They're learning, but they're being forced to learn on their own because they do not have the technology or the bandwidth necessary so that they can learn. Now, the other challenge that we noticed while I was visiting these schools is that many of my families have language barriers. Many of my families are undocumented. And so the Department of Education is saying, I require you to fill out these forms, but they have not put systems in place where families understand that they are undocumented and therefore they are scared to fill out these forms. So I stand with the borough president, I stand with his educational policy, and I urge the chancellor and the mayor to do the right thing for Bronxites. Thank you.
Very quickly, we also want to bring the Democratic nominee for the New York State Assembly. We are confident that he'll be the next Assembly member of the 85th Assembly District, which is the district that I reside in. And when he's up in Albany, he'll also take on this educational fight for our children. That's none other than Kenneth Burgos.
Thank you, Borough President. My name is Kenny Burgos, Democratic nominee for the 85th Assembly District. We're here today, the same story about the Bronx, about how the city has failed the children of our borough. I've worked with the Borough President and Monica Major in my time in government to help fill the gaps in our education system, for our kids, for our schools. We've worked together to provide capital dollars to help our children have access to these devices, and these devices are no longer luxury items as they were previously conceived to be. These are necessities that kids need to have in order to have a proper education in 2020. So again, I've worked with them time and time again. I've been in Zoom classes with parents, with students, and spoken to principals. And you see children on their phones, you see children sharing devices to have a quality education, and it's unacceptable in this day and age for a city that's had enough time to prepare for this. So again, I've worked for years, helped to fill these gaps, but all we can do is fill these gaps. We can't fix these underlying issues. These underlying issues fall with the purview of the mayor and the chancellor, the Department of Education. So again, I stand with my colleagues here today, urging the mayor and the city to fix the problem and give our children the quality education that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. My appointee to the PEP, the educational panel for public policy, is none other than Geneal Chacon.
Good morning. So I'll keep this brief and to the point. For all these years that I've been on PEP, Panel of Educational Policy, my fight has always been about transparency from DOE. The Bronx community has suffered in the lack of communication dealing with any topics, whether it's proposal for co-locations that affect our community, where they reside, where I reside, because I am a parent from the Bronx, South Bronx and now West Bronx. And we have worked so hard to mend the bridge of transparency throughout the years, 4 years, to now reach to the point that we are in a pandemic and that process is being ignored. Hence the reason why we have very angry parents. And of course, they have a right to be, because I'm one of those parents in spring that was just beside them being angry. I have 3 girls and I had to go through the motion of sharing devices. And I have to be responsible for showing up to represent the community on that device. That's a struggle. Sometimes I can't get on, being in the position that I am, to show up and advocate because of that connectivity issue. It happens to us. It happens to the adults. We fought because we say Black Lives Matters, Latino Lives Matters. Our kids' life matters too. My child matter, my 3 daughters. And at what point, before this year is over, we want to see action. At what point do we say our kids' education matter? Yes, we have had some progress. Yes, we are not saying that it's not being done, but it's not enough. We have to get to the point that we are very transparent with what we're doing. DOE, Mayor de Blasio, we need to be involving the people that needs to be involved. We need to be very transparent when you're doing press conference on the news, and we don't want to hear the same things over and over. We want to hear progress, and we want to know how, when, and what. Let our parents feel at ease. We don't want to be anxious anymore. It's very difficult to wake up in the morning and not know. We already don't know what's going on with COVID. We already don't know if our kids, all our children, are going to be back in school. What we do know is every single child in New York right now are learning remotely. That is what we know. So what do we do with that? We do what we should do, which is give them the devices, give them the gateway to proper education. Because what is going to happen with our Bronx students now, they're going to be waiting like they are now. There are some families who are still waiting. There are some schools who are still waiting. What is gonna happen to these kids when they actually finally get that device? They would be behind. What is your plan for those kids who are behind? We have not heard that. Give us a plan. Sit us at the table. Listen to us. When parents and advocates speak, when elected officials speak to you, listen to them, because enough is enough. We are a loud bunch, and the Bronx will no longer be quiet. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chacon. And you represent us unequivocally at the panel for educational policy. We've also been joined by the executive director of The Point, Danny Peralta.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you guys for having me this morning. Thank you, Salamanca. How you guys doing? I come here today with a little bit of a different message. My name is, again, Geneal Peralta. I'm the executive managing director of The Point in the Hunts Point section of the Bronx. We are a home of innovation, right? Where people say there's no internet, we started to build it out. I wanted to show you this thing right here because this is a P&K. This is a portable network kit. This is the internet, right? We got to demystify these things, right? We're still plugging and playing. We're still waiting for somebody to solve our problems. In the Bronx, we started to solve them. Since 2017, we've been building a mesh network that allows at least 600 individuals a month to get free access to the internet. Again, this is done, again, through the generous support of the elected officials and some other philanthropic organizations, but we can't continue to keep waiting for people to do stuff, and we can't continue to keep plugging, again, into systems that don't really care for our families. And I just wanted to make that pitch. We have to continue to support good programs that are happening out here. We got to continue to support not only giving access to the young people, but also giving them the tools to build the internet, right? We cannot continue to keep plugging and playing. The young people have the power, they have the innovation, they have the imaginations to build out these tools. This right here is the technique 1200, 40 years ago. Believe it. This is how we're going to build the future. Please continue to support community-based organizations that are also out here on the front lines doing the hard work that other people are not doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Something as simple as that. Also representing all of the parents of the CECs throughout the city on the PEP board. With us today is Mr. Thomas Sheppard.
Good morning, everyone. So I think today's daily news kind of sums this up all nicely. Virtual insanity. Our schools have been historically underfunded for decades. Our children have not received the education that they deserve for decades. The city has vowed that it would give our kids the resources they need in terms of technology and access to the internet so that they could get the education that they need. Without access to the internet, without the devices that they need, they begin to now call ACS on them. Parents have been saying since the spring that this was happening. The DOE committed to not using ACS as a weapon against our parents. But here we are 9 months into this pandemic and we're still dealing with the same thing. Virtual insanity. This is insanity. We should not have to live in a community where our children don't have access to the basic tools that they need in order to get an education. Right now, that tool is an iPad or a Chromebook or a piece of technology that allows them to connect to their schools virtually. That tool is access to the internet that allows that piece of technology to connect to their schools. We should not be having this conversation 9 months into this pandemic. We just should not be having this conversation. This is not a matter of resources, this is a matter of will. And my request or my demand to the DOE and to the city is a simple one. Get it together. Give our kids, give our families the access that they need, and stop using ACS as a weapon against our families. Thank you.
Thank you. This is not a matter of resources, it's a matter of will, is what he said. And when we talk about systemic inequities, it's right here in front of everybody's face. Now, we've heard from parents, we've heard from the elected officials, we've heard from organizations, but more importantly now we're going to hear from the DreamYard Preparatory Academy of one of the students, Ms. Lucki Islam.
Hopefully you guys can hear me, but my name is Lucki, and I wanted to just say a little letter. Why are we fighting from our grave to tell you that we've always been invisible? If I were to describe my morning today in one word, I would say it was eventful. And the reason why I say that is because it took me almost an hour to just find this place. Why? Because not that I don't know how to use directions, it's because I don't got service on my phone to give me the directions to come here. I want you to listen carefully. The technology and educational disparities in the Bronx have always been a reality for low-income communities. It wasn't until a pandemic had occurred that these issues were now being brought to light. We're fighting from our grave to tell you that we've always been invisible. This is a letter for the educators and internet providers, the ones who can't hear or see us. This is a letter to the higher-ups, who don't care about us, who can never be us. We're not a priority. We have to fight to survive things. If we're not risking something, we're sacrificing something else. Why is it always a give and take situation when it comes to low-income communities? Why am I standing here giving this conversation? You give us a space to talk and we're wasting our time. Ruben Diaz, he can be in those companies. I need Optimum. I need all those internet plans to be here. How do we get people to realize that all of these oppressions that we're facing, we've been surrounded by it for so long that it's normalized? We're tired of empty promises. We're tired of being sold false dreams. We need action because we may be in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. I think something that I've learned to take away from this pandemic is that we're not all given the same resources. And it's not about inequality, it's about inequity, because the DOE can be giving us laptops, but what if we don't got Wi-Fi? What if our parents don't know how to navigate Zoom to open up all of these apps? This is a reality that we're facing and nobody's talking about it. And I think as a student, it's important for me to know that I have people on my side, and I'm not seeing that right now. Because if I'm lost, people are sending me taxis to come here, and I don't find my way. And I think a lot about this pandemic, we're all lost. Nobody was prepared for this. And I think something that we have to keep in mind is that we've always been in the bottom. And there's kids in shelters that they're not even being thought about twice when people are giving them laptops. I'm not the best speaker, but I can only tell you my experience, and I don't have to justify my experience with statistics or fact. This is my experience. This is the experience of so many kids in the Bronx, but this is our reality today, and we need to change that reality.
Thank you, Lucki. You are the best speaker. Let's give it up for Lucki Islam. Come on, guys. This is about our kids. Now, before we take questions, I just want to thank DreamYard. I want to thank South Bronx Rising Together. I want to thank Bronx Community Relief Effort, Bronx Impact, and Children's Aid Society for being part of this initiative. Again, this is not new. Some of you covered the story a couple of years ago when we allocated funding to the New York City Housing Authority for computers and how long that took. And ever since I've been the borough president, millions, tens of millions of dollars on technology alone. There was once upon a time until last year, think about this, where we wanted to allocate money for Chromebooks and for devices, and the OMB would tell us that that was not accepted in terms of capital funding. And it took for the New York City Comptroller's Office to turn that around. That was only last year. We could have been incredibly prepared if it were not for that. And so that's why we're here today. We are frustrated. We know the city has its resources. What we're saying is, it's time for you to start prioritizing our communities. We're not taking it. We've given you enough time. Mr. Chancellor, we get along, but in March you said everybody would have a device. We're in October. Mr. Mayor, You walking around clueless, I'm sorry to say. But that is also not an excuse. That's not an excuse. The fact that you've been inept is not an excuse for our children to continue to be neglected. With that, any questions? It's hard to say that because we're not getting those numbers, but based on the parents who have reached out to us, we see that a number of things. First of all, the only number that we do have is that only 84,000 devices have been given out to families in the Bronx. We have over 200,000 students, so that's less than half of the students getting them. But in terms of the parents that have been calling us, we're getting, obviously in our shelter system, that number is extremely high, and in different corners of the Bronx, it varies. So we'll give you, we're going to give you guys it's anecdotal because it's only parents who have reached out to us, and it's 500 families. But from there, we'll give you the breakdown of those families, whether they have Wi-Fi or whether they don't even have a device. Remember, some families have a device and no Wi-Fi. Some parents have Wi-Fi and no device, and some parents and families have neither. Since the pandemic started, but that's, that was starting in March. Right. And we have over 200,000 families or students in the educational system. And that's in the traditional public educational system. We're not talking about parochial schools. We're not speaking about charter schools, which have also reached out to us as well, those parents.
What is an immediate sign of commitment that you would like to see come as early as this week that they will try to fix the problem?
Well, number one is the three pillars of what we've asked today. We want for there to be transparency. We want for there to be for our students to have devices, and we want internet service and access. So, working with organizations like you heard from Peralta, who has these devices, going to shelters and retrofitting those facilities with Wi-Fi, speaking and coordinating with the Verizons of the world, with with the AT&Ts of the world, and also just developing a device, a system where when a parent calls, they get somebody at the end of that line where they're getting real commitments as to when that device is going to be given to them, where they can track that device, where they're not giving false hope like simply sending a parent to a library. It is ridiculous to send parents to libraries when the city, it's almost like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. The library system is part of the city system. The DOE is part of the city system. They're all under the auspices of City Hall and the mayor. They should all be working in unison, and you mean to tell me that the DOE doesn't know that libraries are closed during this pandemic? If it wasn't so dire, if I wasn't so frustrated, it's almost laughable. It's like a comedy of errors here if we want to be generous to the city of New York. But we think it's even worse than that. I think that it's just a concentrated effort of disrespecting our communities. It's an ongoing historic neglect and a show of the willingness to not prioritize who we are in the Bronx and in other parts of the city versus certain communities. Absolutely. If that made any sense. We're angry. We need help. Our children are the future. You want them to keep them safe. That's why we're doing remote learning. That's why you're doing blended learning. But we also need education. And the two go hand in hand. If we want to protect our kids and their safety, it's because we want to ensure a brighter future. But how do we do that when we're not educating them? And so all of these platitudes and all of this, from the mayor and the DOE, when they try to appease us by saying Black Lives Matter and marching with us, that's not enough. That's not enough. Our kids need a quality education so they can have a brighter future. And the way to show them that they matter is by giving them the resources, by giving them the devices, and giving them the technology that we've been saying all along for years, not just through the pandemic, for years. And if now, during the pandemic, we're starting to talk about health and healthcare and all these boxes that we need to check in order for this not to happen again, well, education is a part of that. And the city has the resources, or they could partner up with the tech giants to get the resources into the hands of our families and our children. Thank you.
Lucki has a question for you.
I'm sorry?
Lucki has a question for you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you ask it in the on the mic, and then I'll try to answer.
I guess like my question is like, we're having these conversations in the Bronx, and I feel like we know these things, you know, like why aren't these conversations happening in like the optimum provider companies? Why aren't they happening in Manhattan? Because we know this is like what we're dealing with. And I feel like another thing is like we say we want to give laptops to the community. We say like we want to give it to our students, to our homeless shelters, but at the end of the day, people don't know how to navigate these things. There are parents that don't know how to navigate Zoom. They don't know how to like go on the internet and get all of these resources. So it's not about, oh yeah, I'm gonna give you a laptop and you figure out how to use it, because they gave me a laptop from the DOE with a broken cable. And to give it back to them, there's a price to pay, you know? So it's not enough about, oh, I'm gonna give y'all laptops and y'all figure it out. Right. So what do we say about that? What do we say to the communities that have the resources, but they're not having these conversations, you know?
Yep. And it's valid, and this is again, let's give a strong round of applause. This is the same issue that if you look at the report that we put out in 2018, it speaks to this, computer sciences. We put in a lot of funding also so that our teachers, believe it or not, a lot of our teachers where we were allocating computer science dollars and tech dollars, many of our teachers weren't versed on the technology. And when we speak of what we are asking for here today, that technical assistance is part of, again, the pillars of our ask. So it's not just devices, but it's a technical support. It's showing parents and showing even the students and showing the educators how to maximize these devices, how to and the multiple languages, right? So it's not just in the English language. We have such diversity in the Bronx and throughout the city of New York, where parents can't navigate the tech simply because it's not provided for them in their native language. And we know that over 100 languages are spoken in the city of New York. So it's a shame that we're having this conversation in the Bronx. It's a shame because we know that in other parts of the city, things are working so much better for their communities. And what we're doing is that we're showing in unity that we know what's going on, that we know what needs to happen, and that we know who the culprits are. In this case, it is the mayor and the DOE.